The Switch 2 is a strange console to regret. Because for most people, nothing is actually wrong with it. It turns on, it plays games well, feels solid in the hand, it does exactly what it says it does. And yet, a lot of people say they regret buying it. And that disconnect is what I really want to talk about. Because when people talk about regret, we usually mean something failed. Something broke, something didn't live up to its basic promise. But that's not what's really happening here. With the Switch 2, the hardware itself is fine. Not revolutionary, not embarrassing, not secretly broken. Just competent, polished, functional. So if the console itself isn't the problem, where is the regret actually coming from? If you like this sort of content, subscribe and let's get on with the video. For a lot of buyers, the feeling shows up quickly. They unbox it, they set it up, they play for a few hours. And instead of excitement, there's a pause. Not because something's wrong, but because nothing feels dramatically new. And if you came in expecting a moment, a leap, or a statement, that pause turns into disappointment very fast. This is where expectations do the most damage. A lot of people didn't just buy a console, they bought an idea of what the Switch 2 was supposed to represent. For some, it was Nintendo catching up. For others, it was meant to justify the price immediately. For many, it was meant to feel like a reset after years of waiting. That's a heavy symbolic load to put on a single device. And when a product can't carry that meaning, regret fills the gap. Even if the product itself is perfectly serviceable. What makes Switch 2 regret interesting isn't that it exists, it's how uneven it is. Some owners genuinely feel burned, others just shrug and keep playing. Same hardware, same launch window, very different emotional outcomes. And that split has almost nothing to do with intelligence, loyalty, or taste. It comes down to one thing: what people thought they were buying. Broadly speaking, there are two types of Switch 2 buyers. The first group expected transformation. They wanted the sense that Nintendo had crossed into a new era. They wanted a leap that felt obvious without explanation. For them, familiarity seems like stagnation. The second group expected continuation, a smoother version of something they already enjoyed. Better performance, fewer compromises, same core idea. For them, the Switch 2 mostly delivers. Neither group is wrong, they just signed a different expectation contract. And this is where the bridge idea matters, because the Switch 2 isn't really a destination console, it's a bridge. Bridge products aren't designed to impress, they're designed to transition. They stabilize ecosystems, they smooth generational shifts. They buy time for developers, for hardware, for audiences. That's not a hype-friendly role, and bridge consoles almost always feel underwhelming if you expect reinvention. The problem is that the Switch 2 was rarely framed emotionally as a bridge. Strategically, it makes sense. Technically, it makes sense. But culturally, people still projected reinvention into it. So you ended up with a mismatch. A console designed to carry things forward, being judged as if it was meant to redefine everything. That's not a failure of the hardware, it's framing collision. This also explains why some owners are completely fine with it. If you bought a Switch 2 thinking, this is the next version of something I already enjoy, then it probably feels normal. If you bought it thinking, this is Nintendo's next big move, then disappointment creeps in quickly. Same console, different mental framing. Now add context. The original Switch launched into a very different world. Fewer handheld alternatives, less upgrade fatigue, more patience for novelty. The Switch 2 didn't get that luxury. It launched into a crowded, cynical market where people are more price sensitive. Backlogs are massive and alternatives are strong. So disappointment gets amplified even when the product itself hasn't failed. A console that might have felt solid 5 years ago now feels underwhelming. Not because it changed, but because expectations hardened. And there's another reason this conversation feels messy. A lot of Switch 2 regret isn't coming from usage, it's coming from perception. Price comparisons, frustration with Nintendo as a company, years of built-up sentiment that finally had somewhere to land. Some people are disappointed before they ever even hold the console. That doesn't make the criticism fake, but it does mean the regret isn't always tied to the object itself. This is why people keep talking past each other. One side is describing lived experience, the other is arguing principle. One says it works, I enjoy it, the other says this shouldn't cost this much. Both can be true, but when they're treated as the same argument, regret becomes a blunt tool instead of a useful one. This is the part that matters the most. When regret is rooted in the product, it's usually stable. It doesn't soften much over time. When regret is rooted in context, price, timing, expectations, it's volatile. It can fade, it can harden, or it can disappear when the console simply becomes normal. Most of what we're seeing is the second kind. So yes, some people regret buying the Switch 2. That's real. But not because the console is secretly bad. It's because expectations, pricing, company sentiment, and timing all collide at the same time. And the hardware ended up standing in the blast radius. That's not a Nintendo only problem. That's just modern tech. If there's one takeaway, it's this. Regret isn't always a verdict on the object that you hold in your hands. Sometimes it's a reaction to everything you were told to feel before you even picked it up. And until we separate those two things, we'll keep arguing past each other, while the console itself quietly does what it's designed to do. I'm Dark Soul, and if you like this sort of content, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.